I always, before any recording, when I first meet my guests, I always let them know whatever you feel comfortable with is the main priority. You're the main priority, and your own mental health and your own self-care is paramount.
Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Charlie Latham, and welcome back to another episode of the Podcast for Podcasters podcast. Today, we have Carter with us, who's the host of the Touched Out podcast, where they explore the journey of parenthood from expecting parent to veteran parent. How are you doing, Carter?
I'm good, thanks, mate. How are you?
Yeah, very well, very well. If you just start off a bit by telling us why you started the podcast, the Touch Out podcast, that'd be great.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a pretty long journey as far as starting a podcast. I've wanted to start a podcast for many years, and I'd always thought about doing it, but never thought that anyone would want to listen to just my voice. So I was, searching for a co-host and trying to get my friends on board for years, and to no avail. And I could never figure out a niche or something that I would comfortably want to discuss on every episode. So for that fact, I just never did it. It was just always going to be a bit of a pipe dream for me, until around 12 months ago. I'm a father of three, and my 2-year-old son, my middle child, was diagnosed with autism. So post him being diagnosed with autism, my wife and I both simultaneously started noticing a lot of the same markers that he was showing in myself. So a couple of months after my son's diagnosis, I too was diagnosed with ADHD and autism, as a 35-year-old father of three, husband, full-time worker. So it threw me for a loop, and I really went through a lot of emotions, and my mental health took a bit of a dip, and I started kind of mourning the life that I could have had if I had have known previously, and it just got to a point where I decided I needed to pick myself up by the bootstraps and dust myself off, and try to turn something that I felt quite negatively about at the time into something positive. So I started searching online for communities of parents who were diagnosed later in life with autism or any other forms of behavioral disorders or spectrum disorders or anything like that. And I had trouble finding anything that resonated with me. I'm sure there is plenty of things out there that are just kind of in small pockets that I just wasn't able to find. And from there, I was discussing it with my wife, and I was just like, I can't find anything. There's self-help books for parents that have kids on the spectrum, or parents that have kids with ADHD and other learning and behavioral difficulties, but there was nothing that I could find that was geared towards parents. And one day I was just like, I reckon I'm going to start a podcast. And at that stage, I never actually thought I'd go through with it, but it turned from me saying I'm going to start a podcast about this to me mucking around on Canva and doing like mock-up logos and workshopping different names for podcasts in my head. And about a week later, I had this logo and I had the name, and I kind of workshopped that with my wife. Excuse me. And I was like, you know what? I'll start an Instagram and see if I get any kind of interest from anyone. At that stage, I was just like, this still isn't going to happen, but whatever, it is what it is. I'll see what happens. And then from there, I got a couple of followers, and a couple of people reached out saying they'd love to be on my podcast. And then, the rest is kind of history. So the first episode aired a little over 6 weeks ago. And to date, we've got 4 episodes released, 11 episodes recorded, and a pretty cool little community that I've created.
God, that is amazing. A lot of the guests that I have come on talk about the communities they found through podcasting, and it's been a kind of recurring theme, which I found really nice to hear, that people have found those connections through podcasting. So the fact that not only have you been able to find a community through that, but you've also been able to create one is quite incredible, and something I kind of want to dig in a little bit deeper. So when you create the Instagram accounts, How did you find those first followers? How did that grow?
So, excuse me, I reached out to friends of mine. I don't really have any like parental friends that are in my inner circle, but I have a lot of, friends that I grew up with that are now parents, and we got separate lives but follow each other on Facebook and Instagram. So I kind of reached out to some of them thinking, they might be interested in having a chat. So the first episode that I recorded was with an old friend of mine's ex-partner named Kate. And Kate and I had previously had a friendship, and I knew that she had some mental health struggles. And I thought, what better way to dip my toe into the world of podcasting than to record my first episode with someone that I actually know personally and already had rapport with, so I didn't have to feel jittery and nervous and all of that. I already had that comfort with her. So I think that was a really, really important part of why the podcast has seen the amount of success. I'm not going to say it's super successful, but the amount of success has far exceeded what I ever thought would be possible with just little old me. I think that people can just really feel the how genuine the conversations are, and the fact that I actually care
Mm.
about the topic, and I care about my guests, and I care about learning more. And I really, really, I talk a lot about pooling community knowledge and presenting that in a really safe and judgment free space for any and all parents, no matter who you are or how little you feel you have to contribute. Like, everyone has their own journey, and I
Mm.
want to hear about that journey, because out of that 100% of the story that you're going to give, there may just be that 1% that resonates with, however many people, and may just help them in that
Mm.
time that they might be struggling a little bit. So I really tackled it from, it's almost a selfish kind of thing. It was like, I want this knowledge for me, but I'm also projecting that out into the ether
Mm.
for other people to, maybe learn something new as well.
And interviewing people about a subject that's so close to your heart, and as you say, is something you really care about and really empathize with. I listened to that first episode that you recorded, and in it there was a trigger warning about the child abuse that is mentioned in there later on. And when you have
Mhm.
these conversations that you are really invested in and are about often quite triggering topics, have you found that sometimes challenging to deal with yourself, or that you've needed to implement any self-care to stop that from being overwhelming?
Um,
Or is that
yeah,
not
of
been an
course.
issue?
It's hard to talk about. Hearing about the trials and tribulations and the ups and downs of being a parent, or any forms of trauma that people have gone through. I myself am no stranger to trauma. I've got quite an extensive history with being in therapy and everything kind of in between. So I feel maybe I'm a little desensitized to it. But I also work in quite a high stress job in my full time employment. I work for a youth justice facility, so I've been in that role for 4 years now. So I'm yet again no stranger to kind of seeing people dealing with their own traumas and their own issues, and kind of taking on that paternal or like caring kind of role as well. So yeah, I feel like I was able to have myself in a pretty good frame of mind to gear up for these types of tough conversations. And uh, I always, before any recording, when I first meet my guests, I always let them know, whatever you feel comfortable with is the main priority. You're the main priority, and your own mental health and your own self care is paramount. And the podcast always will come second to that. If you reveal things that you later regret, just email me and I will happily edit it out. This is as much your story and your podcast as it is mine. So I feel like just the fact that they see that much care within me as a host kind of resonates with them, and that's what has created this little community. I've I've created these lasting bonds with these people, and majority of the guests that I've already talked to, I stay in contact with now. Like every couple of days, we'll message each other. Um, in some later podcast episodes that haven't been released yet, I did release a snippet 2 days ago of a conversation that I had with a an amazing mum of five from New York, Bree, and in that she discusses um, sending her kids to school in the current climate in America, with the horrible goings on that happen there. And the snippet that I posted was about a minute and a half of the conversation where she describes the hardest day she's ever had as a parent, and her coming home, her daughter coming home from school in tears because they learned crises scenarios and drills that day in case there's an active shooter. And she described the fact that they had given it a name called the Incredibles, which is chilling to me. They're kind of trying to make a little bit of fun out of such a horrible, horrible circumstance. And she ended up in tears, and I ended up in tears with her, because up until that point, the only uh, the only conversation I'd ever seen surrounding school shootings is comments online or news articles or anything in the media. But it was the fact that it was this first-hand account of a real life mum living these things and having to be like, we have to go shopping for a bulletproof backpack that's going to cost us $400. And it was truly heartbreaking. But yeah, I'm super thankful for the amount of vulnerability that my guests are willing to give in that moment. It's pretty magical for me. So I think that certainly translates to listeners and resonates with them as well.
So you said your first guest was a friend of a friend, or an ex-partner of a friend, sorry. Were the next 10 guests, were they also through connections that you already have?
No, excuse me. So after that first episode, and as soon as that episode was recorded, I jumped straight onto Audacity and started editing it, and looking up tutorials. I have zero background in audio engineering or anything like that, so it's very much all self-taught, which a lot of your previous guests have also said. So yeah, because of the ADHD, it was an instant kind of chemical dump in my brain, and I went into hyper focus and was like, let's get these things done. So I got all of that done. I jumped on Fiverr and I hired a musician to do an intro and an outro for me, and that was delivered a couple of days later. And all of a sudden I had this tangible podcast episode that just something that existed in my brain a couple of days prior. So I sent that out through an email to a couple of my closest friends and my wife, and other people that I knew wouldn't mince words when it comes to their opinions. And I got a fair bit of really positive feedback. They said, you say too many times, which I totally agree with, but I think that's everyone's cross to bear when they first get into some form of public speaking, when they don't have any kind of public speaking background. So it's all very much a learning curve. But yeah, all of the other guests so far are people that I have had just submit through the application form through my Instagram. So I started posting on Instagram. I found as many support communities on Facebook and Reddit. It's hard to find guests through doing that, especially when it comes to mental health, because they are very stringent in their no self-promotion rules. So I made sure to message moderators and group leaders and things like that beforehand, saying, look, I understand that this is to an extent self-promotion, but I think this is pretty important. It's not for financial gain. I'm not in it to make money. I'm in it to try to make some form of ripple, and try to normalize a topic that's still quite taboo in modern society.
It's one of the wonderful things that's been happening, especially since the pandemic, is that mental health is becoming a more talked about subject. And
Hmm.
being able to listen to others and know that you're not alone does make a huge difference. So it sounds like your goals to do this has been to learn more yourself and to create this community. And
Hmm.
have you felt like you have learnt a lot from doing the podcast? Has it been, aside from the creating the podcast, editing, you said you used Canva to do the logo, but in terms of your diagnosis and parenting with autism or on the spectrum, have you found that you've learned about that through doing the podcast?
Yeah, certainly. 100%. Yeah, the third episode that I recorded was with a bloke named Andrew from Atlanta, Georgia, who had a lot of similarities to me. He was diagnosed ADHD. He wasn't formally diagnosed autism from memory, uh, but a lot of the experiences that I had were quite similar to his experiences. So just knowing that you're not alone is sometimes enough, to find out about those shared experiences with, this bloke from the other side of the world that I never would have spoken to otherwise is truly special. So to date, out of the 10 episodes, I've recorded with someone from Atlanta, Georgia. Episode 2 was Saskatchewan, Canada. Episode 4 was Washington. Episode 5 was California. Um, Episode 6 was Perth, Western Australia, but he was from London. Um, the other day, I had a podcast recording with a mother of two from Israel.
Oh,
She's
wow.
an ex judo champion and boot camp instructor for the Israeli army. So just absolutely amazing, conversations and connections that I'm able to have with people that I never would have had the opportunity or the honor to have those conversations without this podcast. So it's something that I am incredibly proud of. But there's also the dark side with things like imposter syndrome
Hmm.
and not feeling worthy of doing this, and feeling less than and feeling like I don't deserve the positive feedback or the community that I've created. And that's all stemming from my childhood traumas and my self-esteem issues and all of those things. So it certainly is very much a matter of trying to self-regulate and juggle my own emotions internally.
I think that imposter syndrome is quite a common thing for people to feel when starting a podcast, and I imagine may have been one of the things that came into play that stopped you from making a podcast for all that time prior.
Hmm.
You said that you use self-regulation to help deal with the imposter syndrome. How else do you help overcome that and let yourself know that you are worthy of the praise you're receiving?
I'm still not there. Every day is different, and that is probably attributed a lot to my autism. But I am quite a dreamer. I am very, very much into daydreaming. So I'll be sitting thinking about the podcast and thinking of ways I can improve, and then I'll allow my mind to wander a little bit too much, and all of a sudden I'm daydreaming about having millions and millions of listeners and like this cult following, and I'm leading the charge in like a revolution of change in society when it comes to mental health and things like that. So I really, really have to um, try incredibly hard to manage my expectations. So the first podcast episode at this current time is sitting at around about 240 listeners. Uh, the next 3 episodes didn't do anywhere near as well. So that it was kind of like, oh, I was a bit upset about that, but I really have to step outside of that and kind of look at it as a bigger picture and just be like, episode 4 came out 2 days ago and there's already just under 30 downloads on
Wow.
that. And I just think that's 30 people that wouldn't have heard this episode otherwise. So, 30 people in the room behind me. I'm gonna ask them all to leave because it's not enough room. So I have to really try to think about it like that, and I have to stop focusing on analytics and numbers and all that stuff, and just pinch myself on the arm when I let myself daydream a little bit too much, and just remind myself why I'm doing it. And it's just because I'm passionate about it. And even if it's one person that listens to that podcast and they finish that podcast episode with a little bit more of a smile on their face, or breathe a sigh of relief, then that in itself is completely worth it to me.
Hmm. I think that's a really, really valid point. And exactly as you say, when you've had over 200 viewers one episode and the next episode you only have 20, you think, oh, it's only 20. But that's 20 people. It's a huge amount to be able to share your message with.
Yeah.
So you said you started the podcast, correct me if I'm wrong, about 2 months ago. And in that time, is that correct? About 2 months ago, you started your first recording?
So the first episode aired 6 weeks ago.
6 weeks ago. And so in that time,
Yeah.
you've recorded 10 episodes. I mean, that is
11
11.
episodes I've recorded. Yeah.
That's really impressive. Are you going, is that a backlog and you're aiming for a weekly release? Because that's quite an
I'm
impressive
doing
record.
I'm doing a fortnightly release. I would love to be able to do a weekly release, but my wife had to sit down with me after recording 3 episodes in one day, after a 12-hour night shift, and just saw how absolutely taxed I was. And she was just like, I love you, and this is an absolutely amazing thing, and I am infinitely proud of you doing the thing that you've always wanted to do, but you have other shit that you need to handle. You're a father of 3 kids, 4 and under. I've got a 4-year-old girl, a 2-year-old boy, and a 9-month-old girl. On top of that, I work full time in the youth justice facility, and I'm super involved with my kids. So she was like, "You need to just make sure you can maintain your life outside of the podcast, and don't let it just completely destroy you, and don't let it burn you out." So that kind of kicked me back a little bit. So now I've developed a little bit more of a system, and I send my availability out to guests that have submitted their forms, instead of me being like, when's good for you, I'll work around your schedule, just because I want to make it work and I want to have those conversations. So yet again, it's all a juggling act, and it's all about balance, and I'm still finding my feet. But yeah, fortnightly episodes, I think, is the best thing for me right now. And I make sure that my guests understand that it's probably going to be a good couple of months before your episode comes out. I think every now and then, if I'm feeling a little more generous and I have a little bit more time on my hands to edit 2 episodes in a fortnight, I might, slip a bonus double episode fortnight kind of thing in. But yeah, we'll just see how we go.
Oh, that's fascinating. So you're going to slow down the recording a little bit after talking to the wife.
Yeah, I have slowed down the recordings now. I'm kind of trying to do 1 to 2 every 2 weeks. But yeah, that first couple of weeks after the first episode aired, not aired, went live, whatever you want to say. I don't know the podcast vernacular as of yet. Need to update the lexicon. Anyways, yeah, as I said, I recorded 3 episodes in one day, back to back, after getting home from a 12-hour shift and getting my kids ready and shipping them off to daycare and running on just fumes. So
yeah, I can imagine
even though
that.
I was super charged up, and super excited for all of these podcasts and all of these awesome conversations that I was having and the people that I'm meeting, I have to be a little bit more selfish with my time than I'm used to. I'm very much a people pleaser. I always have been, and I always am one to put myself and my own needs second. It is something that I am genuinely working on. But some of the connections that I've already made through this podcast have already helped me exponentially. I live in a small country town in Victoria, Australia, and the town over from me, a lovely gentleman by the name of Mark, who is a psychologist, owns his own practice, has reached out. He's going to be recording an episode with me next week. But he's offered me free therapy. He has offered me a number of different things that he specializes in, to ensure that I maintain my own self-care to keep this podcast going, because he believes it's something that can become quite magical. and
Wow, that's
I need to
amazing.
make sure I take care of myself. So that in itself just kind of makes me feel like this is something that's definitely important to a lot more people than I anticipated.
Well, I mean, 230 viewers for your first episode is definitely nothing to be sniffed at. I don't think I've ever heard of an episode do that well unless it's got a celebrity do it as the host who's already got a big following. So that definitely shows that there is a lot of viewership out there. Did you do any promotion of that first episode? Did you post any shorts of it on Instagram or?
No, no shorts. There was no video. Just because I wanted to kind of protect the anonymity of Kate. Um, we didn't really discuss video or anything like that, and I was also feeling quite vulnerable myself in releasing this podcast. So I was like, I'm just going to do audio only. I'm not going to ever worry about doing video or anything like that because I don't think anyone will want to listen to my voice for half hour to an hour, let alone look at my ugly mug. um, but since then, I have been releasing video snippets of other podcast episodes with my guests' approval, um, just because it is really really good marketing
Mm.
uh, to bring in a bit more listenership. But I do maintain that it's not something that I'm trying to kind of get rich off or anything like that. At the most, I think I would love to make just a tiny bit of money to be able to outsource the editing, just so I can kind of regain some of my own time. uh, but that sort of thing will come in time. I've 4 episodes in, and I've already got an affiliate deal with Loop Earplugs as well, which is
Oh wow,
pretty cool.
that is cool. I'll put a link down to Loop earplugs in the show notes as well.
And I've
um,
also made some of my own merch in case anyone wants some shirts or stickers.
oh, there you go. I'll put a link to them as well then.
Yeah, but the really important thing to me with all of that sort of thing and monetizing it is that I didn't want people to think that I was trying to make money off the back of people's trauma.
Mm.
So before I kind of went into that affiliate deal and went into designing some merch and things like that, I checked in with all of my previous guests and said, "Hey, are you okay with this? What are your thoughts?" Because I really, really need to feel like the integrity of myself personally and the integrity of the podcast isn't going to be compromised. And all of them were like, "I don't fucking care. Make bank, dude. You do you. Like you're putting yourself and your time and your mental health into this. So go hard." So that kind of set me at ease a little bit more.
Oh, amazing. It's really good to hear someone, especially working in the mental health field, who does have that integrity and really does care about what they're doing, and is really important as well. I imagine it can be quite hard to let people be at ease with that before they've met you, because having met you now, I can tell talking to you that you are genuine. But I imagine just messaging someone, it could be a bit more difficult. So hopefully that's helpful with you now your podcast is out there and they can listen to your show. That I'm sure you'll get other guests reach out and contact you to come on your show.
Mhm.
So I also just wanted to change directions a little bit here to touch. You said you worked on the youth penal system,
Mhm.
and does that relate to your podcasting? Do you have to keep yourself anonymous? Are you concerned at all about if people you're working with were to find your show?
So the podcast itself, I only use my surname, Carter. At work, I tend to try just to use my first name. But as far as anonymity and any revealing details and things like that go, I keep it pretty vague in the podcast. I do have a couple of episodes coming out with other correctional officers from around the country because I think that is incredibly important conversation to have as far as mental health when you're dealing with such a high stress and high risk job. But I ensure that there's no confidentiality breaches. We don't discuss any actual happenings or any kind of incidents that happen in the workplace because that would be a breach of my contract, and I don't want to lose my job. Otherwise, I'll be starting a GoFundMe page and relying on everyone I've recorded with. um, but yeah, I talk a little bit about my role in just a very, very general sense. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. That's interesting. Okay, so just as we wrap up before we end here, it would be great if you could let the listeners know how they can find your show, how they can contact you if they'd like to. I'd also like to just say thank you for the work that you do with the youth and the podcast that you're doing. It is a really great thing that you're doing, and we can't have enough talk around mental health in the world, really. So, yeah, thank you for that. If you can let the listeners know how to find you, that'd be great.
Beautiful. So we have the podcast Instagram. It's instagram.com/touchedoutpodcast. We're available also on all podcast platforms. I have a TikTok, which I've just started posting little bits here and there. I'm not very good with the TikTok. But yeah, so yeah, just the Instagram is the main social media account that I'm running through. There is a link on our bio. If you click on that, that'll have a couple of different links. You've got the guest application form, which please feel free to fill out and send through. I would love to have more guests if you feel that's something that you'd be into. There is a link to Loop earplugs on there with my discount code, 15% off at checkout, and 10% of any money that I make is going to be donated to Panda, which is a amazing company in Australia. It's Panda, PANDA, Perinatal Anxiety and Depression Australia. So they've actually also published my story and my history. And I am currently in talks with them to become a community champion, so somewhat of a spokesperson within that organisation. So that's super exciting. There'll be more on that down the track. And there's also a link on there to my merch website. It's just through Threadless, so it's like a print to order kind of thing. Don't feel the need to buy it, but I just thought, if someone ever wanted to buy a sticker or a hoodie or a mug or anything like that, I may as well offer it and see what happens.
Is Panda an organisation you've been in touch with prior to the podcast, or did that grow from the show?
I was referred to Panda after the birth of baby number 2 because I had postpartum depression. I didn't end up utilizing that referral as I had already utilized my own therapist, but it is something that I'm super passionate about. I think that the work that they are doing is exponentially important, and the awareness that they are raising, especially surrounding postpartum depression in new fathers, is just endlessly important. And I'm really, really, really honored to be able to have them share my story and have them show interest in bringing me on board as a community champion, they call it. So it's essentially a spokesperson. So I think I'll be doing a little bit of charity work and maybe some panels and things like that with them in the near future.
Amazing. Well, Carter, thanks so much for coming on and spending some time to come here and share your story. It's really appreciated.
You're more than welcome, Charlie. Thank you so much for having me, mate.
All right, all the best.